All right, 7th grade, you are going to be making a ceramic tile for your sculpture project where you're going to be working with your name as the subject of your artwork, and your tile is going to also communicate a design or a theme that is something that you like, something that represents something about you. So your clay tile is going to end up being 3 slabs thick, or it's going to have different levels to the height of the clay. And before we ever make it from clay, we need to come up with a design that we're going to work with as a drawing. So here's 2 examples of kind of the process. So the first thing you'll do is build it out of clay, and then once it gets fired, then you'll be painting it any way that you choose. So the first thing you're going to do is design your name in a drawing to begin with on this worksheet. And the directions are printed on the worksheet. This is the size of your tile. The box printed is the size of your clay piece. So when you draw, you want to draw large and you want to fill the space of that printed box, because this is also going to become a template where you're literally going to print this design onto the clay itself and then cut it out from the clay. So here's an example of my last name that I'm going to work with. You can do your first name, your middle name, your last name, a nickname. It's up to you, but I don't want you working with just one single letter. So the first thing I did was think about a theme that I wanted to communicate and the design of the letters that I wanted to cut out from clay. So I wanted mine to represent paint splatters because I'm an art teacher. I don't want you to copy my example, so come up with your own idea and your own interpretation. So I began by deciding that I wanted my letters to have just kind of these organic shapes to it, where it was a style of font that I made up from my imagination, and then I knew I wanted it to kind of have this splattered design around it and on top of it. So you need to work with your own imagination to come up with your own letter design. So at your tables, I will have some examples of other names to kind of see ways that you could draw your letters to become shapes. And then also at your table, I have these packets with the alphabet drawn in lots of different ways. So this might inspire you to look at and create your letters from one of these styles, or like I said, make up your own style. So if you are not an artist who's confident on where to begin, I want you to start with a whiteboard first. Because it takes a little bit of practice to figure out how to draw letters into shape. So the first thing that I would do is decide on what name you're going to use. And when I learned how to create shapes from letters, I began with my regular handwriting first. So if I was going to do my last name, I've got K, E, N, D, A, L, L. So once I wrote it in my regular handwriting, that was just a guide or a placeholder to know how to make things become shapes around it. Because right now these are lines. Lines are not going to work for this project because you have to be able to cut the piece out of clay. So you can imagine that the G looked like this as a line. The A looked like that as a line. The B and the E. So this artist had to imagine how these lines were going to become shapes. So what I would do is practice drawing another line on the outside edge. So I'm following my first line, and I'm trying to keep it equal distance as I go for this one. And when I draw that line around it on all sides, when I'm left, I can erase this when I'm finished, and when I'm left with to look at is a shape that looks like the letter K. So you could practice on the whiteboard lots of different ways to make letters. Maybe the letter E, I want it to be rounded. So I'm just going to work with all curved lines, and then I would erase this in the middle, but then I need to add back my negative space or the hole. You can get creative with how you do this. Maybe my N is going to kind of have these sharp pointed edges around it. Like that. Can you erase this? Maybe my D is going to have like these round little bubbles at the bottom. Leave the hole there. So you can experiment with what capital letters look like versus lowercase letters. Or maybe you do cursive lettering. The key is it just has to become 3D in order for this clay tile to work out. So this is where I would begin, by starting to turn lines into shapes. And then you need to figure out what style you like and how you want your letters to interact. Do you want your letters to touch, or do you want there to be spaces between your letters? It's okay if your letters connect together, where like the G and the A are touching here, or you might want to spread them out based upon your design. So when I came up with this drawing, I just started to create these like real kind of like swoopy letters. So I started out by drawing a K that kind of looked like this to begin with. Although that kind of looks like an X, but you can see where I'm headed. Then when I did my E, I wanted my E to fit right inside this space. So instead of starting my E down here, I tucked it into the side of my K, and I kept things kind of equidistant apart. And I wanted the top of my E to kind of fill up into the top of my K. And then I played around with the N having some kind of movement this way. And then my D followed the same curve as my N. I got that hole in there. The A followed next to the curve of the D. And then I had two different size L's. So I had kind of a big capital L because I wanted to mirror the beginning shape of my K. And then I had another smaller L tucked in. So this is where I began with this example. So then once I had that drawn out, then I needed to figure out what is the base slab going to look like. So your clay tile is going to be 3 layers thick. You're going to have a base slab, then a slab where your letters are, and then decorative pieces on top. Or like this one, your decorative pieces could be in between the top slab and the bottom slab. So we're working with background, middle ground, foreground. So this one, the gray is the background, the white is the middle ground, the colored letters is the foreground. This example, the brick is the background, the letters is the middle ground, and then there's these like blobs on top of the letters, that's the foreground. So you have 3 layers to work with. So then I needed to visualize what were my 3 layers gonna look like. So that's when I came up with this kind of paint splatter design that's gonna be my bottom slab. And then I knew I wanted my letters cut out from clay to be my second slab. And then I want to work with just the rest of the theme of paint splatters. So I'm going to be rolling out and cutting out these individual little splatters that are going to be placed over the top of my letters. So I just kind of designed these like blobby shapes that are going to go over the top. So as a drawing, this looks a little busy, but this is planning out and visualizing my 3 layers that are going to be built up to create this slab. So the first step is to get it drawn out in pencil. You want it to fit inside this box, and then I'll explain how we visualize our levels or our layers and what the rest of this worksheet looks like next.